Let's say you learned something, a new technique. You learn about V-shaped line versus U-shaped line. You try to apply them on track and you simply can't. As soon as you try, everything else doesn't work and you end up losing a lot of time, so you just come back to your old habits. There's a reason for this, and this is what we're gonna talk about in this video. I'm gonna give you a very simple example. Let's take a corner and we want to talk about V-shaped line versus U-shaped line. Double apex like that. And you think, well, okay, U-shaped line looks like this and the V-shaped line looks like this. Here's the thing though, the actual difference between a V-shaped line and a U-shaped line, in theory, people will explain using these big differences. But when you actually go there and drive, it's gonna be more or less like this. The main reason you cannot actually do that on track is because you're trying to do too big of a change in your driving when you're applying something new that you learned. And let me explain to you why this is huge, because this is true to absolutely everything that you learn. I'm gonna give you one more example. This is my braking with a Porsche Cup car, a car with low downforce where your braking on a straight line should not change too much as your speed goes down because there's not a lot of downforce. Remember that. Now let's compare it to this. Now what do we have here? We have a decrease in the braking around this area where we lose downforce. So we start braking harder and we have to release the brakes very slowly due to the loss of downforce. But look at the difference. The difference is just like that. And we actually have two stages. We release very slowly on a straight line and then we release more quickly when we start turning into the corner. What do people teach you? That you have to release the brakes even on a straight line because of the loss of downforce. But what you end up doing? Well, you end up doing this. You release too early and you get under the limit on this area. Why? Because we're applying a concept that we learned in theory. We're doing it too much. And this is the main problem when you're learning something new. And this goes on and on. We can talk about the brake release. We can talk about, even took some notes here. We can talk about exponential steering versus linear steering. Basically, if you're driving a car with low downforce, you're heavily trail braking into the corner. So your steering should actually look a little bit like this. But if you're driving a high downforce car, then your steering should be a little bit more linear because you actually have more grip initially because your speeds are higher. Remember? But here's the thing, people try to do it too much. They try to do something like that and that is too much. The technique doesn't work. You are unable to apply what you learned and then you feel that that doesn't work or you end up just giving up trying to improve your driving in that topic at least. One thing that I always talk to my students, always is, we just went through this new concept. Now I want you to apply this without letting me notice it, because then they will try to do it in a subtle way where the effects are gonna be there, but it's gonna be a lot less. And of course, I'm still going to notice it, but for them, it's gonna be that 1% change. Since we're talking about the exponential versus linear steering, which is kind of a concept that I created because not a lot of people really talk about it, so I decided to put names to it. I'm gonna show you a few examples of that. Here's my Formula 1 steering trace on the best lap I've done, lots of hours put in practice, and this is the steering that I came up with. As you can see, it's pretty linear. You can see pretty much a straight line. But now let's compare that with a very similar corner in the Porsche Cup. There you go. Look at how obvious this looks in the telemetry graph. Now that I talked about it, right? You see the exponential steering here. It's not a straight line at all. It goes up progressively because we have a lot more trail braking. This is the same corner, Silverstone, chicane, the last two corners of the track. In a low downforce, you can obviously see this in the telemetry because I'm telling you. But if you actually go there and try to do it, it's gonna be such a subtle difference that most people will not notice. And again, it comes down to the message here. It's 1% change. It's just a small change that most people will not notice, but you will, especially if you try to feel it in a subtle way. Just feel that 1%. This kind of approach when learning a new technique is your powerful tool to precisely inject a new technique into your driving. If you have my online course, the Motor Race Checklist, this is not new to you because I do talk about that a lot. If you're my student, I also insist a lot on that. But I'm recording this video to you guys because I realized how a lot of people don't get this right, especially when I'm talking about some specific techniques in my social media, in my Instagram, or on my YouTube. And a lot of people comment as if I'm talking about a big change. No, we're talking about small differences that will make, on the long run, will have a huge impact in your lap times. We know that examples are the best way to visualize what we're talking about. Here we have a comparison between my driving and the driving of one of my students, which is a high-level student, but he was doing some of these small mistakes that together were making him 2/10 slower in just one corner, which accounts to almost 2 seconds per lap in this track. His mistake was that he was not really using as much as possible the brakes to rotate the car on the first half of the corner, which would allow him to get a better exit by accelerating the car when the car has pointed a few degrees more. Here we're talking about just a tiny difference in steering angle on the first fractions of a second we start turning in, and just around 5 to 7% more trail braking pressure mid-corner to point the car just 3 or 4 more degrees of rotation before we got back on power. And just because of that, I was able to commit to the acceleration in a very noticeable way, actually. And the cool thing about these things, these car handling techniques, is that you can actually apply them in pretty much all corners, because this is not something that you're gonna apply on just one corner or just on this track. It's a thing that you do with the car that you can do in 99% of the corners. If you understand this 1% change right here in your driving and you apply that everywhere else, you find the benefits everywhere else as well. And here's the proof. Everything we talked about on corner 1, all the differences, all the small differences in what he was doing with the steering, what he was doing with the brakes, we are doing exactly the same things on Canada corner, which is a totally different corner to T1. It's a different speed, we brake for longer, are pretty much the same. Our differences in driving style on turn 1 also were expressed right here, and the lap time difference was actually also similar. And then you go to the last corner, exactly the same thing. Same speed of steering initially, the same trail braking pressures, the amount of throttle percentage on exit, all the same differences. And here, my friends, this is the best example. I simply love showing this to a lot of students. I think I've been using this clip for the last like 15 coaching sessions that I've done. I've showed this video to them to explain the subtlety of techniques that we work on and how we can actually do them without affecting the rest of our technique, and how to do them to the precise level that we need to find optimal lap times. I'm gonna break this corner down showing you the telemetry, describing each of the inputs and what is their functions at each stage of the corner. Just look at how crazy this is. We're going right, so I start turning literally 8 degrees to the right, and I have here a lot of engine braking because I downshifted very fast, and I'm trail braking. I'm in a peak of trail braking. I'm starting to just turn in and start releasing the brakes. So here we have the engine braking rotating the car, we have the trail braking rotating the car, and the steering, it's not actually that important in terms of generating rotation. Actually, it's very easy in this situation to turn just a little bit too much and spin. So you can see here, I'm literally turning only 9 degrees. If I turned 20, a little bit more, still not a lot, that would be enough for me to spin the car. So what I do here in this car, this is the Formula Ford, right? I start turning in, and with my light hands, the force feedback makes the car want to counter steer a tiny bit. And fun fact, here, the steering is pointing to the left. You can look at it down here, and the car is going to the right. Let me clarify one thing here. It's not only going to the right, it's gaining more and more rotation to the right. So it's increasing rotation even though I'm pointing left. And I'm literally pulling the steering to the right. I promise, I swear I'm pulling the steering to the right. Why is that? Because of my light hands technique. I'm allowing the force feedback to push itself back. I'm still forcing the car to the right. The force feedback is pointing the car to the left. And we're just balancing off these forces to keep the car turning on the limit of oversteer, just on the edge, not sliding too much, not sliding too little, just on the very neutral steer where the car is sliding all 4 tires beautifully under braking into the corner. And this is one of the most difficult things to actually do while driving, to apply these techniques to such a subtle level. I mean, I say point the car a tiny bit. I honestly always tell my students to turn in what feels to be 1 degree, because that 1 degree, that idea of just 1 degree of steering angle will give them the precision that they need. It actually will be a lot more. In my case here, it's 8 degrees. In their case, it might be 5, 10, 15. But that sensation, just looking for that 1%, is already enough to make the car rotate a lot. If you have the engine braking and if you have the trail braking done correctly, then the car will want to rotate a lot. So this is the kind of subtlety that you should chase in your driving. Look at this. How much counter steer is that? 15 degrees of counter steer. It's not a lot. It doesn't look like it. Most people will probably think that, well, you're pretty much with the wheel straight. It's not straight. You want to bump up your precision, your sensitivity to these small changes in inputs. If you want to drive fast, if you want to stay on the limit, you have to get this magnifying glass on all these inputs to notice the smaller differences. So check this out. I'm almost finishing my entry here, getting on the second phase, on the late entry phase, getting towards that mid corner, almost getting back on power, and I still did not start to actually point to the right. And now finally, when the engine braking is slower, when the weight has shifted a lot more to the rear tires because I'm releasing the brakes more and more, and the car is pointing a lot more, finally I start turning more the steering more to the point where when I get back on power, well, this is just this car, but when you get back on power aggressively, you can see how I just smashed to 100% here. The car gets very understeered because it is the Formula Ford. But here you can see this is the stuff that makes you a great driver, is being sensitive to turning the entire car into the corner with less than 20 degrees to any of the sides for seconds, while braking, while feeling the engine braking, and while having your hands very relaxed and communicating with the force feedback. Now, how does equipment affect your precision? Well, here we cannot run away from the fact that if you have a direct drive wheel, it's going to give you more immediate and stronger force feedback that will allow you to feel these things much more easily. These 1% adjustments in the steering will be a lot easier to feel and to do if you have a direct drive compared to a 3, 4, or 2 Nm wheelbase. And the same thing applies to having good load cell pedals, because you should be able to feel the difference between braking 5% and braking 10%. And guys, I remember the first time I realized people were braking 20%, 30% instead of just like braking to 100 and then dropping to 0 like I would do when I started. I was like, there's no way I can do this. It's impossible. Back then I was using a G29 and I learned how to do it with a G29. I added a few mods to it to gain a little bit more precision, and it helped me so much. But it really took me, I think, a month or two from figuring out that people were braking that precisely until I was actually making it happen in my own driving. So if you're still in the denial phase where you don't believe you can brake 10%, 5%, 3%, 0.8%, believe me, it's possible. You just need to start getting a little bit better 1 by 1%, doing exercises off the car, just like in the calibration area where you can see the meters. You can try that. Try an exercise, 50% brake, then go down to 40, go down to 30 very slowly, and try to feel that sensitivity, that pressure moving very slowly. And the same thing for the force feedback. When you start turning into the corner, try turning 1, 2, 3 degrees. Try to gain that extra finesse. No matter what equipment you have, you can do it. But yes, I should admit, if you have a direct drive and a load cell, it's gonna be better. If you have watched my video about braking, the one I posted a few weeks ago, and you tried those things too much, then those things might not have worked for you. So go there, watch this video, and try to apply it using this approach that we talked about in this video. And let me know in the comments if it helped. So I have a gift for you for staying until the end. Use the coupon YouTube20 to get the best online course in the planet about racing technique, the motor racing checklist. You can have access to 60 lessons, incredibly advanced and detailed lessons that will make you a much better racing driver. You have absolutely no idea. If you have any questions, send me a message on Discord and I can talk about all that. And by the way, there's a lot of racing technique content on my channel, so make sure you watch this video.